For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Mr. Speaker, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Our allegiances to our allies and friends change constantly. For a decade, exiled Iraqi Ahmed Shalabi was our chosen leader-to-be in the new Iraq. Championed by Pentagon neocons and objected to by the State Department, Mr. Shalabi received more than 100 million U.S. taxpayers' dollars as our man designated to be the leader of a new Iraqi government. But something happened on the way to the coronation. The State Department finally won out in its struggle with the Pentagon to dump Shalabi and his Iraqi National Congress, delivering Iraq to a competing exiled group. What a mess. No one should be surprised. Regime changes, whether by the CIA or by preemptive war, almost always goes badly. American involvement in installing the Shah of Iran in the 50s, killing Diem in South Vietnam in the 60s, helping Osama bin Laden against the Soviets in the 80s, assisting Saddam Hussein against Iran in the 80s, propping up dictators in many Arab countries and supporting the destruction of the Palestinian people, all have had serious repercussions on American interests, including the loss of American life. We have wasted hundreds of billions of dollars while the wounds in the Middle East continue to fester. How many times have our friends become our enemies and our enemies our friends, making it difficult to determine which is which? Our new relationship with Gaddafi in Libya is an example of the silliness of this policy. Long-term interference in the internal affairs of other nations doesn't help us or those we support. The invisible economic costs are enormous, but generally ignored. A policy of militarism and constant war has huge dollar costs, which contributes to the huge deficits, higher interest rates, inflation, and economic dislocations. War cannot raise the standard of living for the average American. Participants in the military-industrial complex do benefit, however. The clear failure of the policy of foreign interventionism followed by our leaders for more than 100 years should prompt a reassessment of our philosophy. Tactical changes or relying on the UN will not solve these problems. Either way, the burden will fall on the American taxpayer and the American soldier. The day is fast approaching when we no longer will be able to afford this burden. Currently, foreign governments are willing to loan us the money needed to finance our current account deficit and indirectly the cost of our worldwide military operations. It may seem possible now because we have been afforded the historically unique privilege of printing the world's reserve currency. Foreigners so far have been only too willing to take our depreciating dollars for their goods. Economic law eventually will limit our ability to live off others by credit creation, and trust in the dollar will be diminished if not destroyed. Those who hold these trillion-plus dollars can hold us hostage if it ever becomes in their interests. It may be that economic law and the hostility toward the United States will combine to precipitate an emotionally charged rejection of the dollar. That's when the true wealth of the country will become self-evident, and we will no longer be able to afford the extravagant expense of pursuing an American empire. No nation has ever been able to finance excessive foreign entanglements and domestic entitlements through printing press money and borrowing from abroad. It's time we reconsider the advice of the Founding Fathers and the guidelines of the Constitution, which counsels a foreign policy of non-intervention and strategic independence. Setting a good example is a far better way to spread American ideals than through force of arms. Trading with nations without interference by international government regulators is superior to sanctions and tariffs that too often plant the seeds of war. The principle of self-determination should be permitted for all nations and demographically defined groups. The world tolerated the breakup of the ruthless Soviet and Yugoslavian systems rather well, even as certain national and ethnic groups demanded self-determination and independence. This principle is the source of the solution for Iraq. Instead of the incessant chant about forcing democracy on others, why not read our history and see how 13 nations joined together to form a loose-knit republic with emphasis on local self-government? Part of the problem with our effort to reorder Iraq is that the best solution is something we have essentially rejected here in the United States. It would make a lot more sense to concentrate on rebuilding our republic, emphasizing the principles of private property, free markets, trade, and personal liberty here at home, rather than pursuing war abroad. If this were done, we would not be a militaristic state spending ourselves into bankruptcy and government benefits to the untold thousands of corporations and special interests would be denied. True defense is diminished when money and energy are consumed by activities outside the scope of specifically protecting our national interests. Diverting resources away from defense and the protection of our borders while antagonizing so many around the world would actually serve to expose us to greater danger from more determined enemies. A policy of non-intervention and strategic independence is the course we should take if we're serious about peace and prosperity. Liberty works.
Gentleman's time has expired.